Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of SPC Paranormal Chronicles. Today, I am delighted to have Kristian Lander with me. Kristian is a filmmaker, a producer, and the podcasts that he works with are, because there's a few, the Phenomenal Nottinghamshire, so there's a clue, it's from the UK, Our Curious World, the ASSAP, which is the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena. That's not easy to say on a Saturday. He does their paranormal webinars and also their ASSAP podcast, Serious Strange. So, Kristian, I know we've been talking for half an hour off air, but welcome.
It's been brilliant. Thank you very much. It's been great to come and join you here today. Obviously, we shared a conversation a few weeks ago. It's good to be reciprocal and see what you guys have got happening across the pond.
Yeah, and you'll not believe some of the stuff we've been talking about. But before we start the podcast official, there's something I need to speak to you about. And I've got the police on speed dial. I need to talk to you about your lamppost porn.
Lamppost porn, yes. So the lamppost porn kind of began as Stratford-upon-Avon. So we basically, William Shakespeare country. I went for my birthday, perhaps 2021, right? So this is post the pandemic, right? So places had just started opening up. So me and my friend, we stayed at the Shakespeare Hotel, stayed in the most haunted room there, and but while out exploring Stratford-upon-Avon, I realised that every lamppost is extraordinarily different, and every one of them had a different plaque on it. So it turns out, of course, during World War II, the proposition was they had to get as much iron and metal as possible to build planes and ammunition and so on. So they cut down all of the lampposts across many different cities. And Stratford was actually, they cut down so many that the city became black. So what happened is every city in the country donated them a lamppost. So as such, if you've ever walking around Stratford-upon-Avon, every lamppost looks entirely different. And from that point, because I then noticed this, everywhere I went on like a day trip or a holiday or a travel blog, I noticed, indeed it's true, because all the architects of every city were all local. And they all have a very unique way of how they have their lampposts look. And because of that, I started taking pictures of lampposts in different towns. And if you go to like Blackpool, for instance, they're all like giant tentacles. If you go to like in London, they're kind of the traditional Victorian square gas lamps and so on. And every area has an entirely different look. And it's quite interesting to see that. And so I just started taking kind of eclectic pictures of them in their setting. And then I started hashtagging it with lamppost porn. And since then, that's now got a bit of momentum on the old Twitter, on the old X.
So how many photographs do you think you've got of lampposts?
It's not a huge amount. I mean, we joke and stuff. It's probably about 50 that's gone up on there.
Oh, okay. It's not
that are all quite different. I taken from all kinds of different places, from like up on the East Coast, Northumberland, Newcastle area. Again, going as far west as Blackpool, going down to like Cornwall, Wales, Peterborough, Norwich, all very different things. And all because of the industries that find themselves in those areas, they're often made of different materials as well. Some have a kind of copper sheen, some have the kind of like industrialized metal. But of course, in more recent years, everyone kind of looks like they're all being imported from China. So they're losing their identity in some cities. So I thought it was fun just to kind of remind us what each area was like.
You definitely need to go to my hometown of Boston, because in our town centre we have what's called the 5 lamps.
Okay.
And it's basically one that's got 5 branches with 5 lamps on. And it used to be a tradition for New Year's Eve for all the drunken lads to see who could get to the top of it.
All right.
By shimmying up the pole. But obviously that got stopped to health and safety and all this malarkey. But yeah, go to Boston, take a picture of the 5 lamps, and then tell me that you've taken it. I need to know.
Okay, next time I'm free that way, I will definitely do that.
Do that. And if you don't, I've got family there, they will hunt you down. They will tell you. So obviously this is the paranormal podcast. It's not about lampposts. So how did your paranormal journey begin from your earliest point of being able to remember?
Okay, so the earliest point in terms of beginning, I don't want to dwell on this too long, but ultimately my mother told me of an account that happened to her when she was 12. So when I was very, very young, my mum shared this experience to me. And that experience is in a small town terrace called Turves, which is it still only has 8 houses on this street now. It's in the Fens. It's just outside Peterborough in the UK, which is Norfolk, which is, if I appreciate that you have an international audience. If you ever look at the UK, Norfolk is the strange ear that sticks out on the right-hand side. In the centre of that is kind of where you'll find Peterborough and the Flag Fens, basically our major farming community. So this street Turves, there's 8 houses on it. My mother, when she was 12, she had 3 brothers, and obviously mother and father, they moved into this particular address. He had just come out of the army, and my granddad and this guy, they'd swapped houses. Basically, their growing family and the other guy wanted to downsize, so they swapped. And in the time my mum was there, my mum started having experiences in the bedroom. Her encounter is that quite a simple one, that she only used to sleep with the lights off, and so she always had her door closed, as well her brothers would like the lights to be on in the landing. And so one night she woke up, she said it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and the door was open. She called out, "Hey, Mum, is that you?" She thought it was a power outage. And so we're talking, this is like 1970, which of course power outages and blackouts were pretty common back then, particularly being out in the Fens. So she's like, someone said no, the door closed. 2 days later, a similar thing happened, and an elderly lady came in, and she says she looked, even though it was dark, this woman looked like she was normal, like it was daytime. She looked very different to the space in terms of her colouring. And she came in and she did the dusting on her lady's kind of cabinet, on the wardrobe, and she then says, "Oh, it's okay, I'm going to go now." And then she then told her parents, my grandparents, they just blatantly disregarded this. The next night it happened again, and this lady left a handprint on her mirror of her dressing table. And then the following day, all the family kind of put their hand to the shape of this handprint on the mirror, and it was, none of them matched up. And she said, over the course of a number of weeks, this lady would come back pretty regular. And she says that she was an elderly lady. She had pom-pom shoes, which are kind of like red moccasins with a little white pom-pom on the top. She wore a pinafore dress. Her hair was tied back. And she just seemed to just come in, do the cleaning, potter around, sit on the bed sometimes, just ask her how school's going, get up and leave again. When the person whose house they swapped with came over, my mum, again 12 years old, told him, "Hey, this happened here." And when my mum went on to describe this individual, he described it as being, that was my wife, but she died about 5 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So I must have heard that from, when I'm like 5 and 6 years old. That perhaps was the first ghost story I'd heard. And at this point, I'm aware of books in my mum's collection, which is, I don't know if one of those books is right here, which is The Uninvited. I was aware that she had read that book. The Bermuda Triangle was in her collection. Another book that she had, that she ordered via Reader's Digest, was called Mystic Places. I remember being about 8 when that came. So that was a really big, black, massive book, used to sit on my lap. It's huge, really silver pages, and it kind of covered topics like Atlantis, Hollow Earth theory, ghost encounters, the Fort Lauderdale time slip, the ancient cultures, mythologies, kind of ancient aliens are kind of sort of mentioned in there. Chariots of the Gods was anyway. So this kind of propelled me into that interest. But also at my school at the time, on a Friday afternoon, I had 2 teachers called Miss Jewett and Miss Green. So I'm 8 years old at this time, and they would kind of, for the Friday afternoon, they would tell a ghost story. They would tell us a story full of suspense, and it would often be like the Bermuda Triangle or the Mary Celeste. And they would ask the kids, "What do you think happened? Could you?" And I think that's so fascinating that a teacher would do that. We probably wouldn't do that these days, but it really kind of fired the imagination up. So in terms of what my inspirations were and what led me on this journey, all 3 of those things are of a kind of combination led me to kind of following this path.
See, and that's the kind of school that I want to go to. Or, yeah, because that would be great on a Friday afternoon to have your teacher talking about ghost stories. It'd be amazing. It'd be really
Absolutely.
cool.
Yeah.
So, obviously, that was your first instance of getting to know the paranormal. how did it kind of move forward through your life to where you are now?
Well, I guess I found myself, gathering local reports, talking to people who had had encounters, just kind of ad hoc, really. In about 2004, I attended Most Haunted Live. In Nottingham, I was at the Annesley Hall where I met Steve Parsons. I can remember being as Kieran O'Keefe when I was there, and I got to meet those kind of characters. So that kind of it made it feel a bit more like it was real. There's people who actually do this professionally, people who do this as a job. So I just got more into gathering local reports, local encounters. I went to the Nottingham's library, is quite replete with some paranormal encounter books in there. In fact, there is a bit of a side story here. Within the Nottingham archives, there's two red folders. They must be like massive binders, really long, and within there, clearly someone over the course from the 1960s to mid 1990 was clipping every paranormal ghost UFO counter from the Nottingham Evening Post and putting it into this box. So I had a massive collection that perhaps people were never looking at. So I was able to go and verify these stories and look and read these accounts, and I was basically writing them up effectively. And then, I'd hate to say, I joined a local paranormal group. I found some interesting parted people. One was connected to a local historian, one was like a local enthusiast, and there was a couple who clearly were on the journey, and we all attended an event at a local pub where they were talking about local history, about Lord Byron and the ghosts from Weir Mill and all that kind of area. And I got invited to join that group, got to meet other local historians and more interesting characters from there. That kind of became a bit more of a serious journey. But 2010 kind of came along, so 3 to 4 years later, I was on I hate to use the word, residential ghost investigation. Now, I was in this house, and I was aware that my compadres, they were talking to the lady downstairs, and I overheard the question going, "Hey, have you looked at your medication?" This lady was not very reciprocal to being told, "Hey, what is happening to you might well be a course of your medication, or might be a more grounded explanation." And here's me, I'm upstairs in the bedroom where I've been told that there's a portal. I've been told that's where his ghost is seen most often. And I'm sat here and I'm on this kid's bed. It's a daughter's room. And I'm just like, what am I putting myself in for here? And it dawned on me the ethics. Never had that clicked me before. That potentially this person downstairs is going to be very, very mad. Clearly we're not believing her and we're trying to ground her. I'm sat up here sort of having a mock vigil because I don't really know what I'm doing. And I thought, this woman could say anything. She could say that someone stole something from her house. She could say that I've gone through, I went through her daughter's clothing or whatever. And it dawned on me the position that paranormal investigators go, full of enthusiasm, trying to chase ghosts, the paranormal, yet we put ourselves in really strange positions from a safeguarding perspective in really dangerous situations. So from that point, I stepped away from being a investigator and I stepped more into the research aspect because I felt ethically, investigators going into residential houses is perhaps not the way to do things. But also, I was aware at the same time I'd read a case from Florida where 2 ghost investigators had gone to a house and basically had been attacked by a person in the house. And I was reading stuff like, it was a pizza delivery guy who'd gone into a house because the person says, "Could you put pizza on the table?" Also got attacked. So this person already had a history of those kind of things. But again, investigators willingly, "Hey, by the way, do you have a ghost in the house? Let me come in. Let me have a walk around." You don't know what this person that you're going to is going to do to you for their intent. And it could be, some of these people could be mentally ill. And I thought, being ethical, we can't be doing this regularly. So I was looking for what ethics looked like, and I came across ASSAP. And from 2011, I went along to their conference. I've been a member of ASSAP ever since, and now I'm one of the directors.
It's interesting that you tell us that particular story, because when I was a paramedic working in Leicestershire, I got called to a ill person, got invited into this first floor apartment. And then as soon as me and my colleague went through the door closed and we heard a click, and we were then hostage for the next 3 hours.
Yeah.
So I fully understand what you say, and it's interesting that you mention about ethics, because most of what we've done is public locations. You pay to play kind of thing. But if we do get asked to do a private residence, we do have a set of questions. And these questions, it covers 9 pages, but you've got space to answer.
Yeah.
So if people are genuine and they want our help, they're going to take their time to go through these questions. And some of them are quite personal. It does touch on the mental health, it does touch on medication, but that's not the first question. It's kind of like towards the end, and there is like an advocate that says we're asking these questions because of our safety and all that kind of stuff. People could lie, of course they could,
Yes.
but but then we will also, once the person has sent that questionnaire back to us, we will then meet up with them, maybe in a public place, but there will be at least 2 or 3 of us that turn up, and then we'll go through the questionnaire. And obviously, having a background as a paramedic, you can kind of pick up on people's behaviour.
You can, yeah.
So that kind of is our safety net, so to speak. But yeah, the amount of people that say, "Oh yeah, if you've got something in your house, come," and then they just plow straight in. They are leaving themselves open for anything, really.
And I think that there perhaps, thankfully, there perhaps is not as many cases as there potentially could be, which is great. But that potential is a risk that I'm worried for investigators going in, putting themselves in that position. Because I hate to use the phrase, I think a lot of people are very naive to the behaviour of other people.
Oh, for sure.
So, and you could go in there with all the bright will in the world, for sure, but unless you've done at least a little homework on this person, you don't know what you're putting yourself in for. Even just that opening conversation of a phone call, sharing a bit of discussion, learning what they feel that it is, how it's affecting them. You can kind of suss a lot of that out quite early through a kind of filtering, really. And I think that's where you kind of have to have that grounding first of all. You can't just believe that they believe it. You have to go, I believe that they're having an experience. So there might be medication involved, there might be schizophrenia involved, there might well be a genuine phenomena happening. So for their experience, whatever it might be, is probably real to them. But often,
Exactly.
you do need to have that delicateness that is, let me just try and filter this first through the lens of what it may be, or let's suss ourselves, and then have a conversation.
Exactly. And one of the good things that we are prepared to do if it occurs, when people go, well, I'm not comfortable asking these personal questions, we then go, well, okay, let's put it into perspective for you. If you have black mold in your property, if it's bad enough, it can cause hallucinations. If you've got dodgy wiring and you've got large electromagnetic fields, EMF, again, that can cause hallucinations. So there are some medications, if you're not on the correct proportions, can do the same thing. So that's why we ask these questions. So we're not accusing them. We just need the full picture, because we can say, well, okay, you've got black mold in your bedroom. Potentially that could be causing your issues. Yeah.
Sure.
So we do kind of explain things. We don't just go, you need to answer these and then we'll decide.
Yeah, and there is a bit of to and fro. I mean, I've been called to cases where someone just wishes to share an experience they had 50 years ago because they can't explain it and it's bothered them ever since.
Yeah.
Can I share my story? And that's actually kind of wonderful. That's actually nice to share with them. Because it must be such a heavy burden on their heart and their mind that they never know who to release it to because they don't trust anyone. Or they don't feel they're going to be taken seriously. And I've now done that perhaps more times in the last 2 or 3 years than even any kind of residential or any kind of public event. I've just kind of been able to listen to someone and their accounts.
That's it.
That's kind of service.
Yeah, and I do think that in this day and age, 2025, 2026, more people are feeling more comfortable talking about it.
For sure.
Because it's more in the public domain now than what it was 15 or 20 years ago. And we did actually go to a private residence, and this individual was obsessed with the fact, I think I mentioned it on your podcast, she was absolutely obsessed with the fact that her place was haunted. But then we found out when we dug deep, she was going around a house using Snapchat on her phone,
That's right.
using one of the filters. So having creases in your sofa, it was trying to make it into a face, and she was assuming that that was a spirit. So
it's quite fascinating, that, isn't it? You know, you've had you can imagine the first time that must have happened for her, and all of a sudden it detected there was something there, and then she's going, "Wait a minute, does it happen again?" And she could go around different places in the house, and she must have followed it around, kind of thing. And you can imagine that it's almost like it's technology pareidolia. It is seeing their face in something, but that actually works really great because that is a demonstrable effect that we can show to people to say, "Hey, this is how this works."
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at all these Facebook groups, and you get members of the public posting pictures, and they go, "Oh, this is my grandfather," and you go, "No, that's actually lens flare," but they don't understand all the technical reasons of rational explanation. They kind of want to believe what they want to believe, and if they think that that beam of light on their picture is their grandfather, then you probably can't change the mind. But in reality, you know that it's lens flare, caused by the camera or whatever.
Sure.
So it is a tricky line between what's right and what's wrong, so to speak.
Yeah, there's a building in Nottingham, a glass-shaped building, and there was someone said that they could see the Virgin Mary's outline on one of the windows, and it does indeed look like it. But what it turns out to be, it's like a water drain pipe from above hitting the rain at a certain angle. It causes the kind of the head shape that it rolls down the window where it's distorted to create this kind of head and shoulders shape. But of course, this has actually happened in 3 or 4 different windows on the same building. So unless the Virgin Mary is appearing in all these different windows.
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's move on. I know you said that you became a member of ASSAP, and that's kind of boosted your research, but how did the podcast Phenomenal Nottinghamshire, Our Curious World, and then the Serious Strange come about?
Okay, so let's talk about those in perhaps the correct order. So Our Curious World was a kind of I wanted to discuss, I guess, the Joe Rogan Experience is such a everyone knows it because it is the world's #1 podcast, right? So I really wanted to do that from 2016, where I'm just having a one-to-one conversation with someone that not necessarily people I can meet all the time. Some were recorded in person, majority were recorded online. I think I did 38 episodes of that, where I was just having a one-to-one, unfiltered, unrestricted conversation with someone. But it didn't just cover the paranormal topics. It also covered I specifically chose Our Curious World because it allowed me to talk about science, technology, emerging discoveries, but also, what inspires people, what engages people, what enthuses people. So I was able to dance around all those topics. And of course, the majority were paranormal related, but it allowed me to go beyond just, why are you an investigator? What do you do? How do you do it? But it allowed me to go, actually, so what makes you tick? What makes you encourage? And that was the discussion I led that allowed me to develop my interview skills. So Our Curious World, I often put down was a learning curve for me to do other things. But with that, I interviewed like the likes of Philip Mansell. I got to speak to Calvin Parker, the person at the centre of the Pascagoula encounter. I got to speak for a good couple of hours. I also got to speak to Taz Thornton. She was a strong feminist voice who has fire elements within her behaviour therapy. Really interesting characters. I got to meet Peter Laws before he became, 2 million subscriber that he is now on YouTube. I got to talk to him when he had like 20 followers. And so discussing, what the paranormal is like, looking at the macabre side of things, from the Anglican perspective from within the church. He'd obviously just got his ministership. So when you meet people who are at different points in their journey and then be able to look back at those conversations, really quite fascinating. So, but I did some work. Phenomenal Nottinghamshire was a a 12-part series I did last year. That launched about this time last year, actually, in January. So it was looking at, there was 2 cases per episode, that it was kind of bite-sized audio, as opposed to being a 1-hour podcast. This is supposed to be less than 10 minutes of particular cases across Nottinghamshire that are generally not found in the ghost hunting books or the ghost story books. Because, I often know many of these people. They've shared their stories to me, or I've gone and had first-hand encounters with their, first-hand reports of their encounters, and some stuff that's generally off the beaten track in terms of stories. So I wanted to record them into one space. So I deliberately did, so there's 12 episodes of Phenomenal Nottinghamshire. I did a podcast with ASSAP, which kind of covered the broad number of those, but also the articles are on my website, kristianlander.com. So you can either read it or you can hear it. So it's an ideal commute podcast, really. And there's some really interesting cases that I found within that, and some bonus episodes too. And one, I finally got one of the mysteries I tapped on. I never knew the ending to it until a few weeks ago when I went to a local speaker in Nottingham, and it's about vampires in Nottingham. And it turns out back in the 1800s, there was in Derby, they were having a stage portrayal of Dracula, and the guy who was playing Dracula, to in order to drum up excitement for the show, actually went to the number of cities around here and came to Nottingham and acted like the vampire on Nottingham's Market Square, which then led to vampire cases being found in the city. And I only learned that recently, and that clicks with this account I found back in the 1850s or 1890s or whatever. They're finally able to put an end to that story. So that's quite interesting when you find these things they hook together. And Seriously Strange kind of is so ASSAP, if you're an ASSAP member, you get invited on a Thursday to Paranormal Webinars Live, which basically is Caroline McKendrick Gibson and myself. We present that. So we have a live audience there. There's generally between 30 and 80 people. And then we have a live presentation or a talk or an event or a panel, and a guest would present their story or their encounter or whatever. And then we would have a conversation. We'd have open Q&A. But then that episode is then recycled to YouTube and onto Spotify as a Seriously Strange episode. So eventually, if you remember, you can be there live and you can participate in the conversation, or in terms of when it goes live to the public, which is really useful because it acts a bit like a recruitment tool. Hey, you can come and join ASSAP, you can join these conversations, or you can have the presentation. Here you go. And we have now 256 presentations available on the YouTube channel for ASSAP that are, they're evergreen. Anyone can listen to them whenever they like. Dedicating to themes now because there's that many have covered those topics. So that's building a catalogue of professional talkers who are involved in academics, serious researchers, enthusiasts. So that is a really big library of content to delve into.
And don't forget strange people from Canada.
Strange people from Canada, indeed, yes.
So that was actually quite a logistical nightmare because I had to fly to the UK on family business when I was supposed to do the live one. So we ended up recording it a couple of weeks before.
Did you?
But then I joined the live Q&A at the end.
Yes.
From a little hotel in Skegness, and I'm sat on the bed on my phone. But it was thoroughly enjoyable, and I do thank you for inviting me. So
it was fun.
It was. So do you find, and I'm really going to put you on the spot now, do you find that you have a favourite of those?
There's a few that I'm very much aware have not got the traction that I believe they should. So as such, I find them to be much deeper of interest. There's like The Black-Eyed Kids by Dr. Peter McHugh. He perhaps is the most well-wrote author on the topic. I don't think that's got enough attention. There's a particular episode by
Lee Hatfield.
Lee Hatfield. You're absolutely right. Lee Hatfield, it does not have enough attention. I think Haunted Canada, as a title, although it's a bit ubiquitous, so I don't think it perhaps is getting the attention that it deserves. I also don't like the way that YouTube titles and Spotify titles with the graphic suit each other too well. You can't really have the title on the graphic. It doesn't like long words. It doesn't like more than 60 characters. But how can you tell a story? So I think I called yours in the end Mills, Jails, and something Haunted Canada expose or something. Just so the YouTube algorithm goes, these are really interesting topics. We can narrow it down, as opposed to Haunted Canada. You have to put these like kind of like shock phrases in there. It's like Daily Mail head titles just to get eyes on board, or
Which
so YouTube even gives them any traction.
ended up being Haunted Ontario because Canada's a big place.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. So moving on from your podcasts, there is a particular subject that's close to your heart that you want to talk about, and that's the Thunderbolt incident in 1987.
It is. So it's a story that I came across 4 different times before I decided that I needed to be the one to investigate it because no one else had. So if I describe the story at first, and then I'll describe how we got there, and then I'll tell you about the encounter. They are interesting. So the day is the 12th of November. It's 1987. It could be raining. I say it could be raining because I've been to the Met Office. So I've got the Met Office's official data for the area. They said it was clear sky. The reports from everyone says it was raining.
It's England. It's raining.
It's probably right. So what I have on this particular evening, it is most people in the area. So do you know where Mansfield is?
I do, because I'm from Lincolnshire. So okay. I know.
So yeah, it's North Nottinghamshire as you go up towards Lincolnshire. Yeah. So Mansfield is a rather large town there. Not quite a city, but rather large town. So between Nottingham and Mansfield, there is Kirkby and Ashfield. And that's where this encounter happened. So it's on the A60, so the main through roads there. So again, it's 1:30 in the morning. People are watching one channel, and because late at night, it's 1987, so of course most channels have turned off at this point. BBC's Genome Project says the BBC turned off at 1 o'clock. Channel 4 didn't air past 12 o'clock, so I can definitely say that it's Central TV that's broadcasting this. It is a showing of the Battle of Britain. So, the famous World War II movie. And during the time that Britain is getting attacked in the movie, an explosion happens. I have 54 different accounts where this explosion is definitely recorded as an audio thing that happens in the environment. Not only does there's no explosion, there's a fire, the school in this area, this alarm goes off, a chimney is struck. This chimney then, it's broken, it falls down. A gentleman who lived in that particular flat on 8 Abbey Road, his boiler exploded in the living room. The bricks went out into the walls. They surrounded the room itself. Damaged beyond all recognition. In fact, if you to go there now, you can see where the wall, the back of the house, the upstairs flat really, had to be entirely replaced and the chimney entirely replaced. Along this particular street there, this Abbey Road, there I have 36 written statements where of all the damage that was caused along this street. So this includes TV aerials burning, VCR and TVs blowing, windows that were shattered inwards, windows that were shattered outwards, an air draft that appeared to be a wave that went up the street. There is lightning bolts that went in and out of people's houses. There is a number of explosions that happened down the street. Another house that got hit by this physical object. This house was then shifted 2 degrees from the upper window. So the upper left side of the house was struck, so much the house then tilted to the right. All the doors within the house then did not close properly due to this. The inside of the upper bedroom, the wall was scorched. So it actually blistered all the wallpaper on the inside of the upstairs bedroom. So it got superheated. The roof then became covered in a silver metallic material. The owner of that particular house, I got to speak to his carer, and I recorded a conversation with her in 2020. And so her story is of his terror of what happened at that time. He'd gone out. He was a car mechanic working on cars in his front garden, effectively this whole front area like a mechanic would do at that time. Kind of working class kind of guy, grounded chap. He saw these 2 lights coming towards his house. He saw them hit the house. At that time, he was covering these cars because he thought there was hail happening. They didn't want these cars to get damaged, so he was putting this plastic tarpaulin over these cars when his house got struck. And then he saw it come down crash in a woodland called Thieves Wood. He's not the only person who saw this crash, but only one other person saw the crash. Her name is Rachel. She lived at the end of this street. Her house is facing the woodland, so she was 12 years old at this time. She sat up in her bed because the house rumbled as this wave came across the house. She said it felt like it was an engine had come from. She heard the explosion. That's what caused her to sit up in bed. She looked out of the window and she described what she said to me was a ring of fire, and that went and crashed into the woodland. The object not only then crashed into the woodland, set fire to the woodland, then rose up out of the woodland and crashed again in what was called Annesley Hollow. If you know Nottingham well, you probably know Annesley Hall, which is the former home of Lord Byron. Annesley Hollow sits within the grounds of that particular location. Thieves Wood is along the A60. So that is the series of events that happened in 1986. So 1987. 45 minutes later, there are helicopters in the air. There's two Chinook helicopters, 7 other helicopters, Gazelles, Lynxes among them. They then do a full lockdown of this area. So they lock down all the streets, Diamond Avenue, the main strip of the city. Army are then brought in. They secure this town down for 4 days. So all the streets in and out of there are closed. The guy whose house got hit, he goes to where this crash site has happened. He was then told to go away. He was threatened. There's a couple of phone calls that he has where he's like, my house is damaged. What the hell am I going to do here? And they threaten him to say, look, if you talk about this, you talk to anyone about this, you're going to get done for harassment. In and around this particular time, the story that ends up in a Nottingham newspaper is called The Recorder. It's kind of one of those free advertisement newspapers. So basically 45% of the magazine is car ads and window ads. There's a story on page 7 of that magazine where it's the headline says, it's a bolt out of the blue. It's the local Ashfield District Council declare this to be a weather incident. There's an insurance company who worked on Diamond Avenue. I've got the guys. Got this book here called Cosmic Top Secret. Guy written by John King, used to edit UFO Reality magazine. There's an encounter in here called File 31. I can go to it here. Basically, it discusses this very encounter. Wherever it is. 25. So there is 2 investigators who I come to learn of much, much later in my life. There we go. Document number 9 of this encounter. So in this encounter here, it's a slightly different story to that. The bare bone facts are there, although the date is wrong. The date is wrong by a month. So there's 2 investigators, Andrew Emerson and Dominic Belgin, 2 people I took a long time to eventually track down, and I have eventually done so more recently, only in the last year, in fact. So both of them were before members. In fact, Dominic was an ASSAP member. So they went to this location 4 days after the event happened. So when the military pulled out, whatever, they had picked up some stuff, and they had shipped off whatever this object was. They described in this book here, in this encounter to John King, a burned area of 90 square feet. They had replaced the soil. They checked it to say it's about 9 inches deep. They replaced it with clay. But the people in that particular area, even now on the Facebook page where I was asking for some first-hand accounts of people who remember that particular story, they are still confused whether it was a UFO encounter, a weather event, or whether they should not talk about it. So all these things are true and happening. There's an account that's actually in this book from he's an electrical engineer who works on the main strip of Sutton and Ashfield. He described poltergeist encounters in his house. He said that all the lights turned on in his house. He was in the living room. The lights from his passage came on. The hi-fi came on. The TV and VCR, all the lights came on them, and then they burned out. Abbey Road, where these things first happened. Again, the VCRs and the TVs all burned out. So something very weird happened to a lot of people. Part of the reason why I think the weather event is still persistent is because at the time there was an insurance broker who lived on the main street, who basically was the main insurer of many of these houses. He was unable to secure insurance to repair the TV and the video players because the Met Office and the government had said via Ashfield District Council, this was a weather event, it's an act of God, we can't replace what it is that happened here, it's one of those things. So the insurance never paid out for this event. So it's listed as a bolt out of the blue. Now, the reason that I came across this account when I was going through the Nottingham City Library archives, I came across these red folders that I spoke about earlier, and in there was a newspaper clipping of an event that happened in 1997, so 10 years on, that was held by a guy called Anthony James. He was like a prime ufology investigator of that time. So he hosted the East Midlands UFO Reports Association. So he was hosting an event where he had the Ashfield District Councillor appear, who spoke about his encounter on that day, and he described how he saw this object doing loops-to-loops. It then banked, twisted round. It was zigzagging over the sky that day. It clearly was out of control. It was shot at, then came down, then took off, and then it bounced, his quote, and then came to rest in Allesley Hollow. But he wasn't the only person who was at this particular event talking about his first-hand experience. There was another people who heard the explosion. They dealt with the fire teams and the fire crews there who were responding. I've spoke to the repair teams who got involved with doing the fixing and the repairing, and the fire teams who were there. But in 2011, so this is 4 years after I first read this newspaper, this clipping. So in 2011, I started to attend a meditation circle in Hucknall, again on the A60, and I'm just meeting new people. I'm trying meditation out, trying to relax my mind. The person who's running this meditation circle is called Alan Smith, really, really tall guy. He claims that he's a medium in his spare time. He then shares to me after 6 months. He goes, "You're into UFOs and stuff, right?" I goes, "Yeah." He says, "Well, let me tell you a story." So he says, "I used to be a National Express bus driver, and part of my job was to go from Nottingham to Mansfield and up to Leeds every day, first thing in the morning at 6:30. That was my run every day." And I remember back in November 1987, and I was stuck behind traffic. And what had happened is there was a military motorcade, he described, pulled onto the A60, and he says it was a flatback HGV truck, heavy goods vehicle. He said there was something massive on the back of this truck, and it was flanked by military vehicles at the back and the front, and a police escort. And he said he followed this for more than half an hour, and it veered off, going off towards Sutton as he continued up into Mansfield. And he says, I swear there was a UFO under that. That's what he said to me. And he says, and have you heard about the encounter that happened? The back in the Mansfield UFO case? And I'm like, no. So I hadn't. So this is 2011. I didn't really touch it again after that. 2015 comes along. So 4 years later, I get an email. And the email says, "Hey, do you know about the Mansfield UFO encounter?" And I'm like, sort of. So I then just, in my email correspondence with this guy, I described to him this article that's in the Nottingham archives and this Alan Smith's kind of story to me. And he goes, "Well, I investigated this on the day. I went there and I found that I was the one who took samples from the soil and discovered that they put clay where this explosion happened, and it goes down to about 9 inches. I've got a sample of this for you. Would you like me to bring it?" So I'm like, sure. So I meet up with this guy, and I can only describe on this table, wrapped in foil, it looked like sponge cake, but it was a rubber material. And he goes, "Yeah, this is what they put under the ground where this UFO came down. And he goes, I'm telling you now, they covered it up. Whatever happened here, they covered it up. Okay. So I put a video out onto YouTube called Did a UFO Crash in Nottingham in 1987? And that video has done quite well. It's got about 10,000 views. And the people who replied to that video are really quite interesting characters. So some of them, Anthony James is actually one of them. He's like, no, you think you need to see some more details or some more information about this? And then in 2020, a lady gets in contact with me. And her name is Billy Shears, sorry. And she describes to me, she says, well, my house, the UFO came over my house. I saw it. The person who, so it came over my house, I heard this massive rumble. I get out of bed, I think it's going to be another Lockerbie bombing, is what her phrase was. She says, I'm expecting to see a plane crash outside because the whole house vibrated, there was a massive explosion. I think I'm going to see another Lockerbie. So I come down, I come out of my bed, I come downstairs, I go outside, so I go to my window, she says to me, and the house that's opposite theirs is the fire chief's house. So his name's Mr. Walton. So she says that she saw him get out of his car. So he goes to his drive, opens his gate, gets in the car, drives out. He must be hitting like 60 miles an hour. He basically is then shooting towards the fire station. So she told me that was her encounter. And I'm thinking, there's something to this. There's got to be something to this. This is now 4 different people who've come to me and said something. So I decided to start putting some data together. And I started to gather these reports together. So from that point, I then I have 54 reports of a audio. So they're audio witnesses that they heard this explosion. Most of them believe that the explosion happened in the air, and most of them believe that something was shot down. I can categorically say the explosion is not something that got shot down in the air, but it was the boiler that was at 6 Abbey Road. As the fire team told me, and as the council repair team told me. That was definitely the explosion. It was a boiler at this house that definitely exploded. But the perception's really interesting. I have 5 different reports of a visual encounter. They saw something, but every one of them describes something entirely different. Some describe a ball that's zigzagging across the sky. One describes it as it's a yellow vehicle that they say it's got a yellow glow underneath it. One, in fact, as a lady, is her description is really different. She described it as a green Christmas tree. And her position is really interesting. She says, I was pregnant. I was 8 months pregnant at the time. I'm sat on my floor. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. We're playing the game of life with my family. I've got my back against the sofa. And in front of me, I've got the bay window. So she says, I have a clear view out of this window. And the whole house starts vibrating. There's a weird rumble. You know, we think the building's going to collapse. And then over the house is this, it's like a triangle at first, and then there's another triangle behind it, then another triangle behind it, but like they're overlapping. So she says it's like a Christmas tree, and it comes over the house. And no one else could see that because it only took a second. And then it zoomed off, and it then curved to the right from her perspective of her house. There's an account in Annesley where a person sees it do a loop-to-loop, and she says what it looks like, the loop-to-loop, whatever it is, it comes out of it, and it's far too low. If you know Mansfield at all, there's where Kirkby and Ashfield becomes Annesley. There's like the Annesley Road. There's a particular building there that has a plaque on it. And on this plaque, it says this is the highest point in the county. So in terms of its height, in fact, on the plaque, it says this is the same height as the Ural Mountains in Russia. So it is, in terms of from water level, sea level to where that is really quite high. So it may be that something has come out of a loop-to-loop and is, in fact, has just come out of it too low. It doesn't perhaps realise where the lay of the houses are, or sort to avoid, buildings and residential streets or whatever. So that is the story of the Thunderbolt incident. But then I had more people come to me and going, actually, there's something even more to this. So a lady got in contact with me, and she describes to me, she goes, I used to run the taxi company in Ravenshead, which is one of those little satellite villages around that area. And she says, we had to redirect all of the for those 5 days, she said 5 days, but the event happened for 4 days. We had to reroute all the taxis around the area because the military had locked down these roads. So we had to go as far down as Hucknall to come back into Mansfield, having to redirect them right out to come back in, as far as like Sutton and Stelford. So, but she says, my husband, he's an RAF nut. And it turns out that he knows the pilot who was one of the RAF Chinook pilots who landed a Chinook in the field opposite. And he has a very different perspective on what the story is. Okay. So you can see the story. It's over time, it's almost like an urban legend crossed with fact, crossed with what on earth did happen. So, in terms of local news, on the 13th of November, the day after, the news cycle changed because Diana and Charles came to the city of Nottingham, and thus, of course, that became front page news, and the story of what happened in Mansfield in this bolt out of the blue kind of disappears from local news. So those locally are still under the perspective they shouldn't talk about it. The military has told them not to talk to anybody. Has gone door to door, do not talk, there's nothing to see here, nothing happened, don't ask any questions. On the I think it's the 15th of November, two police officers turn up at the house of the guy who was the mechanic to say, hey, what is it? What's this stuff you reported on your roof? This silver material, this silver substance. So they take a sample. The following day, the Department of Special Sciences from London turns up from Whitehall, and they take samples themselves, and they say they're in like a military, but they're in a kind of an official capacity. They're in suits, but they're military suits, and they leave. Don't talk to anyone. Don't tell anybody. You shouldn't talk to anyone. A day later, 3 Russians turn up at the house. So again, this is the story of that carer who came to live in that house with the guy who had this encounter, the mechanic. So he's in his 80s now. Unfortunately, has dementia. So as that sickness was happening, she basically was his living carer. So he had recounted to her all these events that had happened. So I think hers is technically a second-hand story, but it's from a first-hand source. So she says that he'd said to her that these 3 Russians turned up. I didn't want them in the house. I needed to know why they were there. And I've got this sound clip, actually. I could send it over to you. She says that 3 Russians turn up, and they wanted to know about the silver stuff on the roof. And they wanted to know what had happened in the area, where the UFO had came down, where the crash site was, because they didn't know. But he was scared because they were Russian. And he was I might not be an honest guy, but essentially, this is 1987. The Cold War is still very much a real thing. I've got 3 Russians at my door asking questions about a UFO that hit my house. So from this point, he shuts up, doesn't talk to anybody at all. And he was the guy who was threatened to say, if you do talk, you're going to be filed with harassment notice and you're not going to see your kids again. So something very serious happened in this particular area. It's a phenomenal case because what appears to be the case is that, so Rachel's perspective, so she was the young girl who heard the explosion. Her house is at the opposite end of the street, so she sits up and she looks out the bedroom window and she sees a ring of fire. That's very much her description. And I watched her argue with all the other people on Facebook when I put this request out there, because all their encounters were like very audible, some visual. Then there was a slide that melted. These trees got set on fire. These roof tiles got burned and singed. The garden equipment got melted. The TV videos got blown in the houses. Because obviously the area was connected to the roof. So whatever came down the street had extreme heat and burned all these roofs. And she says, "Yeah, I saw. It was the afterburner of a plane." So, but she was the only one who had that perspective based purely on her position. So she always argued. She says, "When I saw Top Gun as I got older, I saw the afterburner at the back of the plane. That was the ring of fire that I saw. It was a plane." And then, if you look on that YouTube video from the I made in 2015, one of the comments is that yes, I was a helicopter pilot, and what crashed was a Harrier. So there's this really weird story here where you have a UFO, it hits everything, it's a weather encounter, the government doesn't pay out because they say, no, it's an act of God, no one's at fault here, and they maintain that. And there's this strange heating of all this houses on this strip, and you have military involvement, they shut down the area, there's the account where it's clearly backed on a truck, it's taken away, and then they repair the roof, they repair the buildings, they repair the chimney of these houses along here. In fact, the house that got nudged over, that actually had to be demolished, and there's an old private residential estate built there now. So the perspective is it might well have been a Harrier that may have done a loop-to-loop in the sky. The pilot perhaps was too low. He came out of his loop too low and basically scorched the top of these houses. That may well be the conclusion of the story. But of course, in this book from 1999, this came out here. There's a magazine called Nexus, which is an Australian publication, and there's an account on Stephen Greer's website, which you can find in the Wayback When Machine. They are the only 3 places online you will find an encounter of this event happen. But they all kind of put it firmly in the UFO section. That there's a cover-up here, there's an event happened here. But I think it's more than likely what we saw was a plane that crashed, and that was the reason why it crashed and then was able to come up and dived again into Annesley Hollow, because the person who responded to that video says, yeah, the back aileron got hit as it hit the house and clipped the back wing, the aileron. And that's what caused it to have made it unstable in flight, and that's what caused it to bounce and come up and back down again. So it's fascinating because it actually is every aspect of what should be a UFO encounter. It is described as such, it is remembered as such, but actually it has a more grounded story. But there is a cover-up. The cover-up is the government today still maintains it was a weather event, because I got them to still tell me that back in 2000 when I contacted Ashford District Council. I says, look, this is what I have. I believe that it was this encounter. The RAF says they wouldn't confirm to me what it was, but I think this was a plane that crashed. And they're like, no, it's a weather event.
That is crazy.
It's a full journey that has all these different elements in there. And when I told this story at an ASSAP conference, Stephen Volk, the writer of Ghostwatch, was in the audience, Midwinter of the Spirit, and he stood up and clapped this and says that was the best story I've read, and that's the best journey of story I've read as a presentation, because damn it, the amount of times I come to these things and they always leave it as an ubiquitous ending that doesn't mean anything, but you have a conclusion. It's just to me, and that was brilliant. Thank you very much. And as soon as Stephen Volk said that to me, I was like, oh my god, I'm a happy bunny now. I can live and die happy.
So we've got the weather event.
Yep. So it's officially described as it's officially a weather event. I actually do have the original Met Office files. They say it's a clear night. The accounts say it's raining, maybe even hailing. But the official accounts says it's a clear night, despite the fact that they do say it was this bizarre lightning event.
So, putting your hand on your heart, after having all that information, what do you think it was?
I believe it's a plane. I think it's a Harrier where something clearly, maybe a jock pilot came out of a loop too early, didn't realize how low he was. Oh shit! I got to pull the brake back up, and of course that heavy heat blast that's going out underneath then scorches the top of these buildings and basically clips the chimney on Abbey Road, then clips the house again, and it has its crash, comes up and takes off again. But it has all the hallmarks of a classic ufology case, including Men in Black, Russians who turn up at houses. What's really interesting is that for the longest time, I've thought that... do you know there's a particular guy called Henry Armand Victorian, a character in British ufology from around the 1980s. In fact, if you pick up most magazines, you will find in the letters section, Henry X or Armand Victorian is a prominent writer. He he became famous because he put in more subject to access requests to the government than anyone else, like the freedom of information requests, because he was after Pacific files about ufology. Anthony James has his view and his stories and encounters with that chap. Well, he was Armenian, which sounds Russian. He lived in Nottingham around that time. So I think the Russians who turned up at his house was him and two other chaps.
Interesting. But the thing is, though, if a pilot was screwing around in an aircraft, lost control, and it crashed, all the military would have to say was this aircraft had a malfunction and crash. Just a normal. So why didn't they? Why did they say it was a weather event?
I don't know.
But that's not the only part of the story, because what happened 7 years before that?
So what happened? So there is an event that happened 7 years before, in July 1980, in the literal opposite diagonal corner of this field. So where the I tried to if I was to describe, if you can imagine a crosshatch, so one major road with another intersectional crossroad. So the housing estate where this guy got his house hit is in the bottom left corner, and the field in the top right corner was another field. That's where the Chinook then landed with these gazelles and lynxes and stuff. They all landed in this particular field. That location is famous for the Hollingwell incident. So the Hollingwell incident is a case where 358 children, potentially 2 dogs, 2 horses, and a number of adults collapsed over the course of a day. It's unfortunate because at the time it's described as happening instantaneously. It's sometimes known as fall down field. I participated in a documentary with Andy Whittaker for BBC Sounds, and I have a presentation using the original documents from the time online. If you look for the Hollowell incident, A Curious World special, you'll find that where I literally actually go through the paperwork of what the reports were at the time. So what was happening there, it was filled with 2 events happening, which is not described very well in the press at the time. All the major newspapers covered this for a number of weeks afterwards. The children were attending what's called a jazzy band event. So for those who don't know, in the mining industry, because all this particular area is very much mining towns in this area, part of their social requirements was to have other events happen. And these jazzy bands were kind of like marching events. If you were in the US, you kind of have these marching bands playing like recorders, tubules, dancing, having kind of military drills, kind of throwing batons up in the air. And that's what was happening as a kind of an annual festival of those jazzy bands all coming into one place here in Kirkby. Unfortunately, no water and no refreshments were supplied to these children or these people and families. But they had actually bussed in people from all over. They were wearing these tight-fitting clothes, had these hats on that were made of fur, really kind of large, heavy hats that were kind of being paraded in military style. So they were under a lot of duress, a lot of stress. And it was first thought that had these children had poison. That was the first kind of thought. There was a call from the people there who were organising the event. They had said, "Don't drink the water; it's poisoned," over a megaphone. A little bit later, the same calls going out as that, "Oh, the ice cream van has poisoned people," because these people were collapsing. So don't eat any of the ice cream. And apparently, that particular ice cream man suffered, a lot of stress after that. The ambulances over the course of the day were taking people. So they had took too long to respond. People were getting the cars together, gathering the children, taken to Queen's Medical Centre, taking them to Kingsmill Hospital. And I think over the course of the day, I think it's 358 or 368 or something, children had basically had this suspected incident for what happened to them. It was not ever decided what actually happened to them. and as such is still kind of considered to be a paranormal event. What is intriguing, though, is that at the time, the government, along with the Queen's Medical Centre, they had a number of their representatives decide what could be the possible causes of this. And one of the fears was, I think, number 9. They listed 9 causes what potentially could cause this. One of which is the water source poisoned? Was there contaminated food? There was a particular smell of bleach, a chemical smell in the atmosphere that actually turned out to be J's fluid, like a bleach, being used in the toilets. To say that there was not hundreds of people turn up, a few thousand people turned up to this event. Unfortunately, there was only 8 portaloos. So the over application of J's fluid for the bleach was in the toilets, by the way. What was the other reasons? One was there was nuclear waste buried nearby, maybe. This was the 1980s. There was a big fear about that, of course. One was it a UFO? One was it VHF radio waves? Was that the cause of this thing? So you can imagine the kind of conspiracy theories that happened in the newspaper, the Daily, everything from the Star to the Guardian, the Independent, the Mirror, the Sun. They were all running on stories. 400 kids, pass out. And the kind of first blame was landed at the hands of the organisers. Then it kind of became it's the farmers' fault. They checked the field for everything from poisons to what was it? So when they dust crops and when they dust grass, the
insecticide.
That's right. That's it. So that was kind of where they were looking for these things. So of these 9 reasons, that's how they kind of came to the decision. What could they rule out? So they managed to rule out the UFO pretty early. Apparently, a UFO crashed on this field a couple of years before. Entirely separate to the one from 1987, and entirely separate to this kids falling out. Apparently, a UFO crashed on this field. The VHF radio waves is a really interesting one because, of course, we kind of live in an age now where we think the 5G and the 6G communications network might be causing damage to our heads or whatever. They had the same fears back then with UVF being used, so VHF being used with very high frequency radio waves. Then was that causing these children to collapse? It turns out there is a radio mast on this particular field, but it was only used by the RAC as a relay to their vehicles out in the field. But so that fear was allayed. One is that there was underground bunkers there that contained stored nuclear waste, and they had leaked into the environment, and the people were getting poisoned. The former underground train railways, basically, that then were being used for nuclear waste. That was a big fear at that time. Of course, that was discounted out of hand. And so they discounted these 9 reasons. And then, they attended mass press briefings. There was a lot of news coverage. That 9 reasons then went up to 15. They found there's a few other thoughts of what it could have been. And again, all of them were dismissed. And actually, it could not have been this, it could not have been this. And they were left with a decision that says, well, the only thing that happened to these children is mass hysteria. They only passed out because they saw each other passing out, and they then also decided to pass out. And that actually is where the story is left. It is left as a story of mass hysteria. And in fact, Bob Rinker from 14 Times then went on to write a book about mass hysteria cases. And of course, this was prompted by the fact that he went through all the newspaper archives and columns and clipped out all the news stories about this and gathered them all together. So he became the go-to guy for all this particular story. Bob Rickard, sorry. So what did happen here? It wasn't until 2012 that one of the chemicals that was used on a field adjacent to that used something called tridamorph. Tridamorph is a chemical compound in 1980 that was absolutely fine and not a poison to use, but it was found out later to be a kind of a fertilizer chemical that did cause those kind of problems. Red itchings around the eyes, a constricting of the throat, a drying of the mouth. And that was basically compounded by the fact that these children are wearing tight clothes. They got stress going on. They're already wearing these heavy hats. There's no There's no bottled water available. What there is a pipe, a hose pipe from the local farm that was basically just taken down to this particular area where they were at. It's mixed up also with the story, is that on the same field at the same time, there's a kind of a traveller's fair that's happening at the bottom of the field where they're bringing their horses and they're bringing their community together. And so it's often said that there's one fate that's happening, one event. There's actually two. That they probably are connected, but there are two separate events that appear to be coalescing at the same time. And it was said in, I believe it's in the Guardian news reports, that there was two dogs that were taken ill and a horse that was taken ill. They were proven to not be the case in the final reports that were in Ashfield's District Council report. They were concocted by the newspaper. That could have been the Mirror actually, but I'm sure it was the Guardian, but it could have been the Mirror. In the hospital reports, it does say that they were all suffering from dehydration. They were all suffering with red eyes, itchiness, irritation, but everyone was let go. Only a few stayed overnight. There was 2 newborn babies that were taken to hospital, but they were precautionary aspects. And there was a police officer, a police lady actually, she was taken in, again as a precautionary notice because she also had inhaled and her throat felt like it was gripping, it was tight to breathe. So with this documentary, it wasn't a documentary, it was a report by Nottingham Trent University, in 2012. In 2015, there's a documentary made about it. No, sorry, 2003. My apologies. So 2003, this documentary is made covering the fall down field event, and they highlight the fact that this tridomorph would have been the basis of this. That at that time in 1980 wasn't considered to be a poison, but was later considered to be much later on, and that's when. And Andy got in contact with me around 2021 from the BBC, and we did that documentary together.
So it's interesting that to start off with, that 2 strange incidents have happened in close proximity.
Literally, across the road. Literally.
And there's unconfirmed stories or accusations, if you want, about what's happened for both locations, but 7 years apart. So with regard to the Hollingwell incident, was it mostly children or was there adult, apart from the police officer that you mentioned, how many adults were also affected?
And if you give me a second, I've got the PDF right here. So a story. So I went to the government and the records archive, and they said they didn't have any records of this event in there anymore. I went to Ashfield Library and I found they do have a listing in there, but I had to get a Freedom of Information request put in. But I then the next day turned up at the library, picked it up. You can have this. It's fine. You can read this if you like. But it turns out it's actually the only copy. So I scanned it in and made sure I took a photocopy of this. So if you bear with me, I can tell you exactly. Because I've got that right here. Ambulances conveyed 65 people to hospital themselves. Okay, here we are. So, the environmental officers were informed that 255 patients were recorded at being at the hospitals, but it is estimated there were 400 people were seen at various hospitals. The officers visited 224 of the above and recorded details. 193 of the 224 seen were children. 37 children had no symptoms. Some bands were hardly affected. Of the patients seen by environmental health officers, 37 were male, 187 female. Majority of the females were aged 11 to 15. The major complaint was nausea, stomach, and head pains. The various people maintained that policemen and fire crew were admitted to hospital. It has also said that horses and dogs were affected and had to be put down. We can absolutely clarify that only one policewoman did go to hospital at the time of the incident, and her condition was no way associated with this. She was taken for medical purposes. 2 babies were admitted to hospital because they were premature and only a few weeks old. There is no source of complaint about horses or dogs being put down. So it was really interesting because these documents actually they gather quite a few expert panels. So here's the 9 that I was talking about earlier. So on the Sunday, the 13th of July, they was ruled out as being, it could have been poisoning, There was a fire not far from here, water supply, pesticide spray, temporary toilets, and ultra high frequency radio waves. And yes, there's the numerous other theories have been advanced from the press and the public, ranging from low frequency noise transmission to an extraterrestrial visitation. These have been considered, but are found to be without substance.
No shit.
Yeah, so basically, it's a herbicide at the end of it, is what they claim to be the problem.
But it's funny how when you get all these people that are affected, that you say that over 1,000 of them were there. If it was a water source or contaminated food, at these events, everybody has ice cream, everybody drinks water. Back in the day, like you said, bottled water wasn't a more common thing like it is now. So it makes you wonder why more people were not affected if it was a contamination within the water or a food source.
So in this section here, it talks about the possibility of heat exhaustion. Children wore tight-fitting uniforms and tight-fitting, unventilated headgear. Some of the children were wearing heavy sashes covered in medallions, showing success from previous events. The organisers have stated they expected a portion of the children to faint at such events. It must be considered, but despite the misperception in the press, that not all the children collapsed at the same time altogether. The children were collapsing 5 to 6 at a time over the course of 3 hours. In all, ambulances took 65 people to hospital, whom have all recovered very quickly. Now, in the latter stages of this report is where it gets really interesting, and actually it's where Bob Rickard takes his inspiration to write his book. So it turns out there was actually 2 other accounts from around the same period where this same thing happened. So there was one in Newcastle, and I'm just looking at that, just bringing it up now actually, where the same kind of thing occurred. There's some of the headlines here from the press at the time. Daily Star says, row over chaos carnival cover-up. The Mansfield children collapse blamed on judges. The Guardian, children's collapse cover-up claim. Evening Post, mysterious illness, more new victims come forward. Sheffield Telegraph says, jazzy bands ready to march again as new mystery illness strikes them dead. Or strikes them down, sorry. So, added to this, in the appendix of this report, is 2 reports from The Lancet, actually, from October 27th, 1973, as a breakout of abdominal pain, also by mass hysteria. And this is how they build their conclusion. So this report says, a children's gala from 1972, 130 visitors, mainly girls belonging to juvenile jazz bands, developed a spontaneous illness, leading to gastric pain. Local children were only affected. The symptoms were not serious and were only momentarily brief in duration. No physical cause for the symptoms has yet been discovered, and the reasons given are thinking that this episode is mainly a hysterical reaction. So this was the basis. There was that particular one there in Northumberland, and the other one's in Newcastle. It talks about a gala has 400 band members, 300 supporters, many adults, 300 local children, 200 local adults. Jazzy members have about 80 members in. And they collapsed in much the same way as happened here. So it's decided that when someone sees a person collapse on the floor, it might be that it develops a kind of contagion that then also happens to them as well. So I understand the reason why the government's decision to say, actually, well, we've exhausted all of the possible options of what it might be. And then they decided that it was down to mass hysteria. But this one here from Northumberland says, a 16-year-old girl playing the bass drums collapsed within a few minutes. 5 to 6 other girls in the band then became ill, complained of dizziness, abdominal pain, fell to the ground, and passed out. In a short time, a large number of other children appeared to then also be ill, clutching their abdomens and crying. It was thought that the children may well have been poisoned. Over the course of the next 2 hours, 160 children of 4 adults were also taken with the same symptoms. But then when given water or when just roused up, they woke up as if nothing happened to them. Absolutely remarkable.
That it is, and it's a little bit ridiculous to come out with that result, bearing in mind that if that was the case, why were these events not happening all over the country and all over the world at other events?
They do. That's the thing. They do. That people do have spontaneous, collapsing, fainting events that appear to be contagious.
Well, my 13 years in the military, in the ambulance service, I don't think I've ever known of other people. Yeah, okay, if you're a little bit squeamish, then fair enough. But like, the jury's still out on that one, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I'll send you over. So I've got the original government report, so I'll send it over to you. It's actually worth a read because it is 1980s, very medical in terms of how it's approaching it. So it's definitely worth a read.
So would I be right in thinking that out of all the different paranormal subjects that there are out there, that the UFO world would probably be your most favourite?
It is, because I think what is the UAP UFO topic of what we describe to be poltergeist and what we are experiencing in terms of time dilation, in terms of kind of high strangeness, may well be one and the same phenomena happening, but we've described it over time to be different things. And I think this is the case if you look back at, say, even in folklore, stories of little green characters are quite ubiquitous. You have characters who appear, but when you get close to them, they appear to have odd descriptions, strange places where they go to strange places and then are returned, time situations where missing time occurs. They appear to wake up, they having gone to fairyland or having gone to an underworld and come back. So it makes me wonder whether the ufology case is much older than we first think it is. Most people think the modern era of ufology is from 1947 onwards. Even Kenneth Arnold's encounter, he didn't have just one or two encounters. He also was investigating other encounters at the same time. To say what, if we think the modern era probably ended with the disclosure in 2017, I think we can say that we are in the disclosure era or the disclosing era currently. We have, but I think the cases for abduction phenomena is probably much older than we think it is, due to the crossover with folklore. You can look at those cases and go, if I take my lens off, I can see this being this as well, because it has the same attributes. And the same with poltergeist phenomena too. There's, strange occurrences in the house, things moving around with no one really knowing they are. People who have close encounter UAP experiences also highlight that's the kind of thing that happens. So I do think they may well be one in the same phenomena that hasn't quite been described as yet very well.
There's a lot of stuff out there that we don't know the answer to, that's for sure.
These days, I'm more inclined to believe it might not necessarily be off-world. I think they might well already be here, monitoring us on a regular basis. Haven't really gone anywhere, and we may well be an experiment of some kind, I don't know. Or just they are watching us to see what we do with our technology, or they have an interest in what we do and how we're going about doing it. We may well be in some kind of weird zoo. Who knows?
Yeah, because I was intrigued to, I can't remember if I was told it or read it, but the fact that people say that the reason why aliens and UFOs have not communicated with us is simply because our technology is so antiquated compared to their technology that our stuff can't communicate with them, because we're like dinosaurs and cavemen in comparison to their technology.
Yeah, in fact, we can't talk to ants, so we can't even talk to a dolphin. We can't talk to a dog yet. There's clearly some simple communication can happen, but not in terms of a complete rapport-based conversation. I think when those things happen, we might... How do we talk to something that might potentially be so far ahead of us technological-wise if we can't talk to a species who's equally as intelligent as us? Yeah. Maybe if we get to that point, that might well happen. And if you listen to some of the abduction reports or those who have encounters or very, very close encounters, they talk about that. That's the case, and that's the reason they don't talk to us, because we're not there yet. We should live in love and harmony, build each other as a community going forward. Maybe we can get to a certain point where we eventually have technology that does that. It is interesting, though, that a lot of our technology appears to be converging towards that kind of case where it looks like we're going towards synthetic telepathy. The idea that we can have computers on us or that can be utilized in a way that communicates in very, very high speeds, that we instantly understand what another person is seeing in front of us. We can see what they see, or we could have initially simple thoughts transferred between us, via technology. That technology doesn't seem to be too far away if it hasn't already happened. And I think as that refines resolution-wise, as Neuralink and other similar technologies expand, we might find ourselves having a symbiotic relationship with technology. I mean, think of it, most of us can't leave our phones alone, myself included. We're constantly connected with news, but we can only process as fast as our fingers can do. If that was in our head or some kind of eyeglass, maybe, you would have instantaneous communication at all times. And that appears to be how these beings talk and communicate with each other. It could be that they are synthetic. It could be that they are potentially technological as opposed to biological agents. That wouldn't surprise me.
I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying. Just for the record, my phone's here too.
We are. The phone is the right size to be on our pockets at all times. And it has so much tech on board that can communicate in so many different ways that we perhaps don't use it to our fullest potential as it is.
Yeah. And if you think about it, if you go out for an evening and you leave your phone at home, you're like you've got your arm cut off because there's something missing.
It does feel that, doesn't it? It feels like you don't have a tool or a limb,
Yeah, exactly.
If you go out to the shops or whatever, you deliberately don't take your phone because it's charging. You feel lost.
Yeah, sort of
it's a strange feeling.
Yeah, the amount of times I've gone to the cafeteria at work and I've my phone's been charged, like you just said, and I'm waiting for my food to be ready, and I go, oh, I've not got my phone with, and normally I'd do that. I look at my phone and where is it? Oh, it's back in the office.
What did we do before we had something to scroll on?
Exactly.
If you get a bus or a tram, like I do in Nottingham, just like everyone's on their device, just seeing what's happening in the news,
books and papers and things.
Yeah,
Kristian, I'm gonna cut it short because we're not cutting it short because we've been an hour and a half.
Good.
Believe it or not, we've been here for an hour and a half, my friend. What's next for Kristian Lander? What's on the agenda?
So, there's a few things. There's a few personal goals I want to get, and I don't want to make them public. There's certain things I want to do in 2026. I certainly want to get published in a certain magazine, and I certainly want to appear on a certain radio show. Consider them to be personal goals, coast to coast and so on. I want to be able to say I've appeared on coast to coast. Consider it to be a personal goal. I guess I'm going to be continuing with the ASSAP thing for a while. Seriously Strange, just kind of seriously go from strength to strength. I've discovered last month, Spotify does that roundup that they do every year. Wrapped up, it turns out that Seriously Strange is in the top 15% of podcasts.
That's awesome.
Astounded me. In terms of video podcasts, anyway. And most podcasts now have a video element, so I was astounded to see we were in the top 15% of that. So the YouTube videos don't hit 200, yet in audio they hit thousands. So entirely different audience, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So, and when are you going to publish your lamppost porn book?
I don't know if there's ever going to be a book. More of an ongoing X and Facebook series that will be all hashtagged with lamppost porn.
Yeah. Kristian, it's been an absolute pleasure. You're one of those people that we could talk and talk and talk and talk, and then you find out that your podcast is 5 hours long, and and we haven't had a bathroom break, so we're both crossing our legs and okay, I must. Is that what it is? Yeah, exactly. But Kristian, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'd love to have you on back for another episode to talk about some other random stuff. But for now, I'd like to thank you for your time. I know it's getting quite late in the UK, but thanks very much, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care, man.